Hold position. Marshal Dervin's command cut through the cave ridge like a blade, his voice reverberating against the jagged stone. Men froze in their tracks, boots grinding against gravel, the air filled with the metallic clink of rifles shifting into ready stances. Holt Rivens steadied his breath and crouched at the edge of the collapsed lava tube, his eyes narrowing as dust curled upward from the fractured rock. The light of the flares cast harsh shadows across his face, and the taste of grit settled on his tongue. Behind him, the ridge smelled of dry iron and scorched basalt, a reminder that the Threx had been firing test ordnance into the perimeter only hours earlier. The silence that followed felt alive, not empty, broken by the hiss of shifting rubble and the faint whimper of something trapped beneath. Holt glanced at the display on his wrist unit, thermal signatures flickering like ghostly smudges in the black. He knew what he was seeing before he said it aloud. They're alive in there. 2 of them, smaller readings. Juveniles. His throat tightened. The cubs weren't just animals. To the Threx, gnarls were symbols of dominance and lineage, and their young represented the continuity of command itself. The collapse wasn't an accident. From the opposite ridge, Strakvar stepped into view, his armor catching the flare light like dull bone. His soldiers lined the rocks with weapons leveled, throats growling with alien chants that carried the weight of accusation. Strake raised his clawed hand and pointed toward Holt and his men. His words carried a guttural edge, distorted through translators but heavy with fury. Human thief, you steal what gives us power. You dig them from earth to make them yours. This is war. Holt felt the soldiers around him tense, fingers hovering near triggers. Marshal Dervin's jaw clenched as he barked back across the channel. We didn't touch them, Strake. You staged this collapse, and you know it. His voice carried a low warning, but Strake was beyond hearing. The Threx warlord's eyes glowed with fanatic certainty, his gaze fixed on Holt, as if the scientist's presence alone was proof enough. Dust cascaded down again, and the faint cry of one cub echoed from the shadows below. The sound pierced Holt deeper than any accusation. He wiped a streak of grit from his forehead and rose, ignoring the weapons trained on him. If they die down there, none of this will matter, he said flatly. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried a conviction that turned heads among his own troops. He strapped the sled from his back and lowered the crawler drone into the narrow crevice. Its camera feed flickered to life on his wrist display, showing fractured stone, scattered debris, and finally a sliver of fur pressed against the rubble. The cub shivered, its breath shallow. The other huddled close, eyes shut tight. Dervin grunted, shaking his head. Riven, you understand what they're setting? You up for? You bring those cubs out and they'll call it proof you stole them. Holt met his commander's eyes, then turned back toward the rubble. If I leave them, Strake wins anyway. His charges will stick because no one will be able to prove otherwise. Evidence rots as fast as bodies. Piers Venn crouched beside him, his hands quick over the pack of instruments he carried. Signals are jammed. Strake wants this buried. You go down there, you'll be off-grid. Holt fastened the thermal tarp over his shoulders, feeling its weight settle across him. Then I'll be off-grid. But those cubs come out breathing. He slid feet first into the crevice, stone scraping against his boots, the temperature dropping with each meter. The air thickened with the scent of damp rock and animal musk. His gloves brushed the slick edges of stone until his fingertips found the faint tremor of a pulse beneath fur. He worked fast, clearing debris with careful pulls, stone grating against stone. The cub whimpered again, the vibration rattling through his chest as he lifted it onto the sled. Its skin was cold, muscles twitching. Holt wrapped it in the tarp and pressed his body against it, lending warmth the generator couldn't yet provide. The second cub was deeper, half buried. His throat dried as he dragged it free, ribs fluttering under weak breaths. Above him, shadows shifted. Threx scouts had crawled onto the ridge, cameras whirring as they angled lenses downward. Holt didn't need to guess their aim. They wanted the image, human arms cradling gnarled cubs, to broadcast it as theft, as manipulation. Holt stared up into the lenses, jaw clenched. His arms tightened around the shivering bodies, his warmth the only barrier between them and stillness. A murmur rippled across the alien ranks when the broadcast went live, images streaming back to their command posts. The cubs stirred against Holt's chest, curling closer, breaths beginning to steady. The scene didn't resemble kidnapping. It resembled something far more dangerous to Strake's narrative: guardianship. The Threx warlord's snarl cut across the ridgeline, fury spilling into the translator channel. You dare corrupt them with your scent. You dare bind them with false care. His voice cracked with rage, and even through the distortion, Holt could hear the desperation in it. Marshal Dervin's men kept their weapons locked, but no shot was fired. Every soldier knew what one pull of a trigger would ignite. Holt pressed his cheek against the cub's head, its fur rough, its warmth returning. He could hear the rasp of its breathing and the faint thump of its heartbeat aligning with his own. Sweat trickled down his temple, stinging his eye, but he didn't move. He let the scouts record what they would. He wasn't there for them. Marshal, Holt's voice came steady over the comm, if they want to paint this as theft, let them. The alternative is 2 dead cubs, and that would prove their story beyond doubt. At least this way, there's a chance the truth gets seen. Dervin exhaled sharply, his voice lower now, carrying a note of grim respect. You've made yourself the center of their war drum, Riven. Holt's lips pressed into a thin line. The cub in his arms shifted, its paw scraping against his armor, a faint cry escaping its throat before it stilled again. Holt looked up at the shadows circling above, cameras whirring like insects. Better me than them. The air grew colder as the night deepened, the rocks radiating away the last of the day's heat. Holt's muscles ached, but he held his position. Around him both armies waited, each side unwilling to move first. The cries of the cubs had ceased, replaced by slow, steady breathing, a fragile rhythm that carried across the stillness. Strake's propaganda had begun, but Holt could feel the shift already. The warlord's accusation depended on fear, but the image now spreading was not one of theft. It was one of survival, and every soldier watching, human or Threx, would know the difference. Keep your aim steady. They're waiting for us to flinch, Marshal Dervin growled, his tone like gravel grinding under weight. The command rippled across the ridge as human rifles stayed locked on target, their muzzles glinting red under the flare light. Every soldier knew what was at stake. A single trigger pull could turn accusation into war. Below, Holt Riven still cradled the cubs against his chest, their shallow breasts brushing against his throat. The warmth of their small bodies spread faintly through his armor, as if they clung not only for survival, but to anchor themselves against the chaos above. The standoff stretched. Threx scouts broadcast Holt's image across their ranks, trying to ignite outrage. Strakevar raised his serrated blade into the air, its edge catching the light like fire. His booming voice carried across the ravine. See how they mark themselves as caretakers. See how they claim what is ours. His words were designed for his soldiers, not Holt, but Holt heard the deliberate cadence of a man weaving a snare. Holt adjusted his position, shifting the cubs onto the thermal sled. Their eyes flickered open for the first time, hazy and uncomprehending, before they nestled again into the folds of the tarp. He whispered under his breath, more to calm himself than them. Stay with me. We're not done yet. His gloves shook slightly, but he forced his movement steady, sliding the sled toward the narrow mouth of the crevice. Dust clung to his tongue, and the scrape of stone against the sled's runners grated in his ears. Ven's voice cut into his earpiece, tight and urgent. They're jamming the feeds, Holt. I'm pushing back, but their relay towers are stronger. If we lose footage, Strake controls the story. Holt glanced upward at the alien cameras still recording, their whirring lenses glinting like predatory eyes. Then, keep their eyes on me, Holt said. If I can get them breathing in open air, the story shifts. Dervin moved closer to the edge, his boots crunching the gravel. His expression was hard, but there was something new in it, an acceptance that this scientist in soldier's armor had chosen the only path forward. He called down, You'll have cover if they fire, but you move quick, Riven. We're running out of patience up here. With a grunt, Holt pulled himself upward, dragging the sled behind. His back ached from the strain, sweat pooling between his shoulder blades beneath the thermal rig. As he emerged from the crevice, the cubs stirred, emitting soft growls that vibrated faintly against his ribs. The sound carried up the ridge, reaching Threk's ears. For a moment, the chant of alien soldiers faltered. They saw their pack lord's offspring alive, not dead. Strake slammed the base of his blade into the rock, sparks scattering. Alive only because he cloaks them. Look how they cling to his warmth. They are already bound. His fury fed the crowd, yet Holt saw hesitation ripple along the alien line. Warriors who revered Gnarls struggled to reconcile accusation with the sight before them. Dervin seized the moment. Strake, your cubs live because one of mine chose not to let them die. You call that theft? Then your word means nothing. His declaration rumbled across the ridge, his tone not pleading but defiant. Strake's jaw tightened, his teeth bared. He snapped a signal with his clawed hand. A squad of Threk's soldiers surged forward, weapons raised, their armored feet rattling the stone. Instantly, human rifles tracked their movement. The ridge rang with the sound of safeties clicking off. Dervin shouted, "Hold! Do not fire unless they cross the marker." The words cracked through the tension like a whip. Holt dropped to one knee beside the sled, shielding the cubs with his body. His eyes locked onto the advancing squad. He could feel the tremor in the earth as their boots struck the rock, hear the hiss of their armor flexing. One misstep would end in slaughter. The cubs stirred again, one paw reaching out blindly, pressing against Holt's chest plate. He caught the tiny movement and froze. The contact grounded him, a reminder that his role was more than soldier or scientist. It was witness. Ven's voice returned, louder this time. "Holt, the Accord mediators are catching fragments of this. Whatever you do, it's not just us watching anymore." Holt breathed out slowly, his gaze steady. "Then let them see." The Threk squad halted at the edge of the marker, snarls echoing through their helmets. Their leader raised his weapon, aiming not at Holt, but deliberately over the cubs. A warning shot would ignite everything. Holt raised his free hand slowly, fingers spread wide, showing he carried no weapon in that moment. His voice rose with quiet strength. "If you want them, step forward and crush them yourselves." The world is watching. The words landed like a stone dropped into water. For the first time, the advancing soldiers faltered. Even through the distortion of their armor, Holt saw their hesitation. Killing the cubs outright, with an audience, would dishonor them. Strake's snarl deepened as he realized the trap had shifted. He turned his blade toward his own men. "Do it! Show them what happens when they meddle." Yet his command carried less force than before. The soldiers hesitated, their eyes flicking between the live cubs and the humans shielding them. Murmurs spread, the rhythm of their growls breaking into uneven beats. Strake's fury was real, but authority alone couldn't bridge the gap between accusation and evidence. Dervin raised his fist, signaling restraint, but ready for violence. Holt felt the cold air on his skin, the sting of grit against his cheek, the heavy weight of every eye fixed on him. He didn't move. The cubs pressed closer, one letting out a weak, rumbling sound that wasn't a cry, but something between recognition and demand. The sound carried more weight than any speech. Finally, Strake stepped back, lowering his blade with a glare that promised retribution. He spat a guttural command, and the squad withdrew, their boots scraping as they retreated to the alien line. The standoff remained, but the battlefield had shifted. The cubs lived, and their survival had been witnessed. Dervin exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly as he turned to Ven. "Get every second of that to the Accord before they bury it." Ven nodded quickly, his fingers flying across the console on his portable uplink. Sparks hissed as the device strained under the interference, the heads-up display flickering red with alerts. "Working on it." Their jammers are chewing through bandwidth. "I'll need more time." Holt eased the cubs further into the tarp, the warmth spreading through the fabric now, their breathing stronger. He could feel their tiny hearts beating against his chest plate, steady but fragile. His own pulse slowed, but his mind sharpened. This was not victory. This was opening. Strake had not lost. He had adapted, and Holt knew the warlord would strike harder next. Marshal Dervin crouched beside him, his voice low so only Holt could hear. "You've given us a chance, Riven. But understand, Strake will not let this stand. He'll turn the whole pack against us, cubs included, if it keeps his grip strong." Holt looked at him, his eyes unwavering. Then we make sure the truth holds longer than his lies. The wind shifted, carrying the dry scent of stone dust and sweat across the ridge. The soldiers remained locked in place, but beneath the rigid discipline, a change had begun. The cubs stirred again, their faint growls echoing in the still air. And every man present, human or Threx, understood the sound meant survival. Artillery test! Ven's warning ripped through the command channel as the ridgeline shook. Holt Riven dropped over the sled, covering the cubs with his body as the shock wave rolled across the rock, hurling pebbles into the air like stinging shrapnel. Dust clogged his throat, ears ringing, eyes burning. He tasted copper on his tongue. The ground beneath him quivered again, this time with the steady rhythm of calculated detonations. Strakevar was no longer waiting to win by words. He was crafting a stage for violence. Marshal Dervin steadied himself against a jagged stone, shouting into the comms. "Hold your positions!" That's a probe barrage, not a full strike. They're baiting us to fire first. His men pressed low, rifles trained outward. Through the haze, Holt could see Threx artillery crews adjusting their heavy mounts, each blast sending ripples of sound bouncing across the canyon. The boom thudded in Holt's chest like a second heartbeat, each concussion threatening to send the predators in the surrounding dens into a stampede. Holt rose onto one knee, brushing dust from his visor. He turned to Dervin, voice raw but steady. "If they keep firing near the den networks, the Gnarls will panic. They'll charge this way, straight into our line." His words weren't speculation. They were drawn from years spent studying migration patterns and predator response to sudden concussions. He felt the knowledge pressing like a burden. Strake isn't just testing our nerves. He's trying to weaponize the packs, Dervin swore under his breath. And if they come at us, we'll have 100 cameras recording the humans slaughtering sacred beasts. His gaze narrowed. "What's your answer, Riven?" Holt lifted the chemo signal sprayer from his kit, its nozzle still coated in residue from the earlier rescue. "We control the corridor. Drones, sound towers, scent trails. We give the predators an escape route away from our perimeter." He met the marshal's eyes without hesitation. "Better to spend energy building lanes than digging graves." The commander gave a curt nod. "You'll get what you need, but if Strake sends troops with them, you'll be outnumbered." Holt glanced at the cubs now sleeping under the tarp, their breathing steady. He felt a resolve building stronger than fear. "Then we catch the soldiers without killing them." "If this turns bloody, Strake wins," Ven's voice crackled back in. "I can tune the drones to broadcast the pack's recall calls. I've got enough recordings to cover 3 valleys, but they'll need ground guides." His hands danced across his uplink, red indicators flashing across his heads-up display. "They're jamming us harder. We'll be blind within the hour if I don't reposition our relay mast." Holt clapped him on the shoulder. "Do it. Every second of this needs recording. Without proof, nothing we do matters." Dervin rallied his soldiers, assigning half to perimeter guard and half to corridor prep. Holt took the lead with a squad of younger troops, hauling acoustic towers into position. The towers gave off low, rhythmic pulses that mimicked the calls Holt had captured months earlier. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening. The sound vibrated in his chest, familiar from countless nights in the field, and he remembered sketching notes under red lamps while predators padded in the distance. Now those calls were weapons of peace. As they worked, a new tremor shook the ridge. Dust fell from overhanging rocks. A Threx raiding party emerged from the smoke, their armor slick with dust, weapons gleaming under flare light. They moved in a staggered line, each step deliberate, driving a group of adult gnarls ahead with shock prods. The predators snarled, eyes flashing, shoulders trembling under forced pace. Holt's stomach twisted. Strake had unleashed them as unwilling projectiles. "Contact front," a soldier shouted. Rifles lifted. Dervin's command came instantly. "Do not fire unless fired upon." His tone carried strain, but he knew the cost of a misstep. Holt sprinted forward, pulling heat canisters from his pack and activating their orange glow. He hurled them down the side ravine, forming a shimmering path that drew the gnarls toward the corridor. The beast hesitated, nostrils flaring at the mixture of scent-neutral gel spread earlier, then broke formation, charging toward the safer heat line. Dust roared under their claws, gravel scattering like hail. The Threx raiders cursed, one raising his weapon to strike. Holt shouted over the chaos, "Spectre squad, nets now!" Foam-charged rounds streaked from rifles, bursting into wide mesh that wrapped the raiders' arms and pinned weapons to their sides. Another squad fired grapple lines, yanking rifles from hands and dragging them, skittering across stone. The Threx soldiers fought to break free, but the foam hardened quickly, locking their limbs. One soldier, taller than the rest, broke loose with sheer force and lunged toward Holt. The alien's breath rasped, teeth bared, blade raised high. Holt lifted his arm shield just as the strike came, the clang ringing through his bones. Sparks lit the air. Pain jolted his arm, but he held firm, shoving back with raw force. Cade Thorne, leader of the Spectre squad, closed in from the flank, slamming a stun rod into the alien's side. The raider convulsed, dropping his weapon. The gnarls thundered past them, their growls shaking the air, muscles rippling as they stormed into the corridor Holt had built. The acoustic towers drew them farther, leading them toward the valley beyond the ridge. Holt exhaled sharply, sweat streaking his face. They had averted slaughter, for now. Dervin strode to Holt's side, scanning the subdued raiders. His voice was low, meant only for Holt. "That's twice now you've turned his ploys back on him. He'll come harder next." Holt wiped dust from his visor, watching the last of the gnarls vanish down the path. "Then we stay ahead. Strake is playing for spectacle, not victory. If we rob him of his show, he loses his grip." Ven chimed in, his voice strained. "I caught the footage. Every second. Accord mediators will see Strake driving predators into us. If we can hold this line long enough, the story shifts in our favor." Holt looked toward the alien ridge. Strake stood above his pinned raiders, his blade drawn but unmoving. His glare pierced the distance, filled with the rage of a man outmaneuvered, but not defeated. Holt felt the weight of that look deep in his chest. The warlord would not stop. The cub's survival had shaken him, but only barely. Holt spoke quietly, almost to himself, though Dervin heard it. "This isn't about cubs anymore. This is about Strake proving humans are thieves. We need more than survival. We need truth solid enough that even his own men cannot deny it." Dervin placed a hand on Holt's shoulder, heavy with grit and command. "Then find it, Riven. Because if you don't, next time we won't be standing on this ridge. We'll be buried under it." Holt nodded, his chest tight, his eyes fixed on the smoldering artillery lines where the next blow would come. Around him the men packed their gear, the scent of burnt stone clinging to the air, the echo of predator calls fading into distance. The night pressed in heavier now, not with silence but with the certainty that escalation had only begun. "Bring me residue samples now, before the wind scatters them," Holt Riven ordered, his voice sharp and urgent. Soldiers scrambled across the ridge, scooping fragments of scorched stone into containment canisters. The explosions from Strake's artillery still echoed faintly in the canyon walls, leaving grit clinging to lips and sweat stinging in open eyes. Holt crouched by a blackened crater, running his glove across the fractured surface. The rock felt rough and brittle, its edges too uniform to be natural. He held a shard beneath his visor light, studying the minute striations burned into the grain. "This isn't collapsed debris. Someone seeded directional charges here." Piers Ven dropped beside him, his uplink blinking with scrambled feeds. The heads-up display across his visor sputtered with static as he tried to stabilize signals. He was breathing fast, shoulders jerking under the weight of his kit. "Strake's jammers are heavier than before. If we don't send something undeniable, the Accord will dismiss this as crossfire." Holt slipped the shard into a sealed case, his jaw hard. "Then we give them undeniable." Marshal Dervin stepped forward, brushing dust from his beard, his eyes scanning the scorched ground. "You're telling me those cubs weren't lost by chance? They were buried deliberately to frame us." Holt nodded once, his voice low. "The evidence is here, but it's fragile. Strake planned for the earth itself to be his weapon. If we don't tie this back to him now, he'll bury more than cubs next time." The wind shifted, carrying the raw scent of burned soil into their nostrils. Threx banners waved in the distance, their soldiers chanting to keep morale high. The sound rumbled like drums through the stone. Holt pushed himself upright and met Durbin's gaze. I want to initiate CRADLE sanctuary corridors, acoustic towers, heat lanes, scent trails, all of it. We escort the packs ourselves, with proof beacons laid at every choke point. Every step recorded, every tamper logged. Durbin frowned, lines creasing his weathered forehead. That's ambitious. You're asking us to shepherd predators while under artillery threat. You realize what happens if even one gnarl dies under our escort. Holt's eyes sharpened. Then we don't lose one. The risks are already here. Either we build protection or Strake forces another stage disaster. He wins when blood flows. Not before Ven interjected, pushing his uplink toward them. We can seed proof beacons, time-stamped samplers. They'll log chemical traces from every blast and identify tampering in real time. If Strake interferes again, the Accord will see it uncut. His hands shook as he spoke, not from fear but from the drain of constant counterjamming. We need their oversight more than ever. From the ridge behind, Cade Thorne, leader of the Spectre squad, strode forward, his boots crunching stone shards. If we're escorting beasts, my men need rules. Do we fire on Threk's troops if they drive them toward us? His question carried the weight of men prepared to die, but unwilling to kill blindly. Holt faced him directly. You fire nets, foam pins, grapple pulls. You neutralize soldiers without dropping them. If Strake wants death on film, we deny him death. The Spectre leader studied Holt with narrowed eyes before nodding once. Non-lethal war in a canyon full of predators. Fine, but my men will hold you to every word you just said. The ground vibrated with another distant blast, faint dust raining from the ridge. Holt squatted near the cubs resting under the tarp, their small bodies shifting with gentle breaths. He reached down, his gloved fingers brushing the curve of a tiny rib cage. For an instant, the battle faded, and he felt the weight of their fragility anchor him. He lifted his gaze back toward the soldiers. This isn't about saving 2 cubs anymore. It's about every one of them. Strake wants proof of corruption. We'll give the Accord proof of sabotage instead. Durbin exhaled through clenched teeth, then gave a slow nod. You'll have your operation, Ribbon, but you'll lead it. If this collapses, it collapses on you. Later that night, campfires glowed faintly against the canyon walls, their smoke curling upward, mingling with the dry air. Holt sat at a field table strewn with data shards and fragments of detonators collected earlier. Ven hovered beside him, scanning each piece under a portable analyzer. The display lit up with chemical traces, highlighting compounds not native to the region. Here, Ven muttered, pointing at the streaks. Military-grade composites. Threk's signature. No doubt. Holt leaned closer, his eyes reflecting the faint blue of the display. His chest tightened as certainty formed. Strake buried those cubs himself. He engineered outrage. The knowledge wasn't victory. It was a map of the enemy's cruelty. Envoy Narvik, the Accord mediator, arrived in the camp as the fire crackled low. His robe bore the insignia of neutrality, his face lined from years of navigating fragile peace. He placed both hands on the table, his voice calm but heavy. Your footage is fragmented by jammers. Your proof must be stronger than words if you expect the council to intervene. Holt slid the container with residue across the table. We have samples from the collapse site, chemical logs from Ven's uplink, and time-stamped data from our scouts. More importantly, tomorrow we'll have live proof. We're moving the packs under our guard with beacon trails. If Strake touches them again, the Accord will see every second. Narvik studied Holt with sharp eyes, his tone measured. Understand this. If one cub dies in your care, if even one adult falls, Strake's accusations will ring truer than your data. The burden you carry is heavier than your enemy's artillery. Holt straightened, his shoulders squared. Then I carry it, because if we don't, Strake decides what truth is. The envoy regarded him for a long moment, then turned toward the fire. I will remain as observer. But know this, truth has little power without survival. As night deepened, Holt walked alone along the perimeter, the cold air biting against his cheeks. The cries of distant gnarls echoed faintly in the dark, rolling like thunder across stone. He stopped by the acoustic tower already in place, its low thrum shaping the air with familiar patterns. Closing his eyes, he imagined the packs responding, not in fear, but in recognition. He felt the enormity of the task pressing against him, heavier than the ridge itself, yet it was the only path forward. When he returned to the camp, Dervin was waiting, leaning against a support beam. "You're staking all of us on this plan," the marshal said, his voice even but firm. Holt met his gaze without hesitation. "I'm staking myself first. But if we succeed, Strake's stage collapses before the world." The marshal studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "Then let's give the world a show they can't twist." The fire popped sharply between them, sparks drifting upward as if carried toward the waiting stars. Holt clasped the marshal's hand, the grit of dust grinding against skin, sealing a commitment heavier than any treaty. "Contact at first light," Cade Thorne's shout cracked across the comms, snapping every soldier awake. Holt Riven scrambled from the campfire's dying embers, boots grinding against gravel as the Meisuzhou eastern ridge erupted in smoke and steel. He could feel the vibration in his chest before he saw them. Massive Threx walkers cresting the horizon, their legs slamming into stone with the cadence of war drums. The sky shimmered orange under the glow of artillery charges, the bitter taste of burnt dust filling his mouth. Marshal Dervin strode forward, cloak whipping in the dry wind. His eyes never left the approaching formation. "They're not probing this time." "That's a full advance." He turned to Holt, his expression flinty. "Strake's moving the packs ahead of them. He's going to drive them straight through us." Holt swallowed hard, scanning the ridges. Through the haze, shapes emerged. Gnarls, their hulking bodies herded by shock prods, snarling under the whip of alien handlers. Their cries rattled the stones. The sight punched through Holt's chest like a weight. Strake was turning living symbols into weapons. He forced the words out steady. "Then we turn their line into a corridor before those beasts are broken against us." Ven's strained voice burst in. "Signals are swarming with interference. I'll hold the uplink together, but if I lose feed for even seconds," Strake controls the broadcast. Sweat trickled down his face, fingers flying across his console as red alerts streaked across the heads-up display. Holt touched his shoulder firmly. "Hold it as long as you can." The world needs to see what he's doing. Thorne's specters assembled in disciplined rows. Foam rifles clutched tight, grapple launchers ready. One soldier muttered a curse, staring at the approaching predators. Thorne silenced him with a glare. "Eyes forward. We do this by the book, or Strake wins." The walkers thundered closer, their cannons swiveling, smoke belching from vents as crews inside pounded war drums to mask their own nerves. Strake's voice rolled over loudspeakers, guttural and venomous. "Behold the theft of your future. Witness how they cower behind beasts they do not deserve." His words rang hollow to Holt's ears, but he knew their venom could ignite soldiers, primed for outrage. Holt stepped into the open, pulling the chemo signal sprayers from his harness. He activated the first canister, releasing a drifting cloud that carried the cub's scent profile. The gnarls lifted their heads, nostrils flaring, hesitation flickering through their massive frames. "Towers now!" Holt barked. Acoustic arrays burst to life, echoing the deep recall calls of a pack lord, rolling across stone in waves. The sound pressed through Holt's chest like thunder, commanding not fear but recognition. The predators faltered, their snarls turning uncertain. Heat canisters flared along the valley floor, creating a glowing corridor that stretched away from the human line. Holt sprinted forward, hurling more lures until the path blazed orange in the morning light. Dust seared his throat, sweat running down his spine, but he did not stop. Strake saw the hesitation ripple through his beasts. He slammed his blade into the ground and roared through the loudspeakers. "Forward! Drive them into the humans! Crush them together!" His handlers lashed shock prods into flanks, sparks cracking against fur. The gnarls roared in fury, torn between agony and the call of the corridor. "Specters, nets!" Thorne's order cut the air. Foam rounds burst around the handlers, ensnaring arms and snapping prods from their grips. Grapple lines whipped out, dragging alien rifles to the ground. One handler broke free, lunging at Holt with a blade. Holt caught the flash too late. The strike slashed across his arm guard, burning pain shooting down his shoulder. He staggered but drove his knee into the attacker's gut, forcing him down into the dust. Thorn finished the job with a stun rod, the alien convulsing before collapsing. The gnarls surged forward, this time toward Holt's glowing path. Their claws ripped through the earth, muscles rippling with raw force. The ground shook beneath their charge. Holt ran alongside them, breath ragged, guiding them with new canisters. For a terrifying moment, one predator veered toward him, eyes blazing with confusion. Holt froze, heart hammering. Then the cub's scent cloud caught the beast, its head jerking toward the corridor. It bellowed and tore past him, leaving only the stink of hot fur and dust in its wake. The walkers opened fire. Energy blasts ripped across the canyon, searing streaks into rock. Dervin shouted, "Counter battery now!" Human cannons answered, launching rounds that detonated into nets of conductive wire. One spread across the lead walker, shorting its legs in a spray of sparks. The machine groaned, joints locking, then toppled onto its side, shaking the valley floor. Cheers erupted from the human line, but Holt knew it wasn't over. Another walker advanced, its cannons spewing fire. Holt yelled into the comms, "EMP, sled forward!" A compact sled zipped from behind cover, guided by two soldiers. It skimmed the rock, slipping beneath the walker's belly before discharging a pulse. Lights inside the cockpit flickered, then died. The machine stood frozen, smoke rising from its crippled joints. Strake's voice thundered with rage. "Fight them! Tear the truth from their hands." His infantry charged, howling, blades flashing. The specters braced, firing foam rounds in disciplined bursts. Grapple lines snapped across the canyon, dragging soldiers down. The clash filled the air with grunts, curses, the sharp crack of stun rods, the heavy thuds of bodies hitting stone. Dust mixed with sweat until the battlefield stank of heat and exhaustion. Through the chaos, Holt kept his eyes on the predators streaming into the corridor. His lungs burned, but he ran until the last of the gnarls passed beyond the ridge, their growls fading toward the valley. He dropped to one knee, gasping, the sting of blood seeping from the gash on his arm. He pressed his hand to it, but his focus stayed on the path behind him. They had saved them. For now. Marshal Dervin hauled him to his feet, his face streaked with soot. "You gave them a way out." Strake wanted blood, and all he got was his beast leaving him. Holt wiped grit from his mouth, chest still heaving. "This isn't victory. It's proof. And we need more." Ven's strained voice cut in again, weaker now. "I've got the whole thing recorded. The Accord will see Strake using gnarls as shields. If we can keep this stream alive, his narrative cracks wide open." Strake's troops dragged their fallen back, his walkers disabled but not destroyed. The warlord stood high above them, his glare searing across the canyon like fire. Holt met his gaze, breathing hard. Both men knew the next blow would be heavier, more desperate. The morning light glared harsh across the battlefield, illuminating every scar and smear of blood. And Holt understood this fight had only reached its midpoint. "Keep your rifles steady. Do not break formation." Marshal Dervin's command rang out as the dust settled from the morning assault. Men tightened their grips, sweat dripping from brows streaked with grime. Across the canyon, Strakevar's remaining troops pulled back, rallying in snarling clusters while the disabled walkers smoldered behind them. The air was hot with the reek of scorched stone and burned vegetation, every breath tasting of grit. Holt Riven stood at the center of the line, chest rising and falling as he pressed a bandage against his bleeding arm. His mind was not on his own pain, but on the empty corridor that stretched toward the sanctuary valley, glowing faintly from the spent heat canisters. The predators had fled there, but they had not vanished from the story. Strake's voice boomed again, amplified through war drums and guttural loudspeakers. "See how they deceive you! They brand themselves saviors, but they weave chains with scent and sound. You are watching your heritage stolen in daylight." His words drove into his soldiers, but even from across the canyon, Holt could sense doubt creeping. The beasts had not fallen upon humans as Strake promised. They had followed another call. Holt turned to Ven, who hunched over his console, sweat darkening his collar. The heads-up display across his visor flickered with static as he forced the feed to remain open. "Keep streaming," Holt urged. "They need to see everything that comes next." Ven's lips pressed thin, his fingers hammering keys like a man fighting for breath. "I'll hold it, but if they push another jammer burst, The signal could burn out. Cade Thorne strode closer, his armor spattered with foam residue and dust. His men flanked him, faces hardened, but eyes betraying exhaustion. "We can't hold much longer if he throws another line at us," Thorne said, voice low. "My squad's drained." Holt studied him for a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than hold. You've turned killers into prisoners without losing one of your own. That will matter when this is over." Thorne gave a short nod, respect passing wordlessly between them. Then the ground shuddered. From the valley mouth came a sound that froze every man in place, a deep, rolling growl that vibrated through stone and marrow alike. Heads turned as shadows moved against the light. The Pack Lord appeared, its massive frame scarred from years of survival, eyes burning gold in the rising haze. Behind it came dozens of gnarls, moving not as driven prey, but as a tide, their shoulders rippling under morning sun. Holt felt the hairs on his arms rise. This was no charge of panic. It was deliberate, measured dominance. Strake raised his blade high, his voice cracking with fury. "See how they come, led by false masters. Humans twist their nature with lies." He thrust his weapon forward, urging his troops to advance. But many of them faltered, staring at the Pack Lord's gate. The predator did not move like a beast in thrall. It moved like a commander returning to its ground. Holt stepped forward, ignoring Dervin's hissed warning. His boots ground into the stone as he advanced to the edge of the corridor. From beneath his cloak he drew the cubs, still wrapped in the thermal tarp, their eyes blinking drowsily. He placed them gently upon the sled at the path's head and withdrew his hand. The cubs stirred, noses twitching, soft sounds rumbling from their throats. The Pack Lord's gaze fixed on them. Time seemed to stretch, every soldier holding his breath. The Alpha stalked forward, muscles rippling, claws scraping against rock with a grating screech. Holt felt the weight of its stare like a hammer upon his chest. He resisted the urge to step back, his hands steady at his sides. Sweat trickled down his temple, stinging his eye, but he did not blink. The Pack Lord lowered its head, inhaling the scent of the cubs. They lifted their tiny muzzles and answered with weak growls. Recognition flashed in the Alpha's eyes. It brushed its snout against them, nudging them back toward its chest. Holt let out a long, shaky breath. Every man on the ridge heard the sound that followed, a deep, resonant call rolling from the Pack Lord's throat, commanding the other gnarls to turn. The entire pack wheeled as one, streaming around Holt's position and into the sanctuary valley. Strake's bellow tore the air. "Shoot them! Cut them down! Show no mercy!" His troops raised rifles, but hesitation gripped their hands. To fire upon their Pack Lord was to court dishonor deeper than defeat. Holt saw it, muscles tensed, but triggers remained untouched. Strake raged, striking one of his soldiers across the chest with the flat of his blade. "Do it, cowards!" Marshal Dervin barked into comms. "Hold your fire!" Let their shame destroy them. His men obeyed, rifles locked steady but silent. The canyon filled not with gunfire, but with the thunder of predators moving past, tails lashing, paws pounding dust into the air. Holt stood unmoving as they streamed by, each beast's eye flicking toward him as if measuring his worth before following their alpha. When the last of them vanished into the valley, Strake's position collapsed into chaos. His men muttered among themselves, their chanting fractured. The image on the laser plasma displays back at Accord Command showed it all. Predators alive, cubs reunited, humans not striking a single shot. Ven's exhausted laugh cracked through comms. "It's done." Every second is streaming uncut. The council is watching him choke on his own lies. Strake, panting and furious, turned his glare on Holt. Their eyes locked across the distance. For an instant, it was not soldier against alien, but two commanders who understood the cost of losing narrative. Holt saw the fury in him, but also the fracture. Strake's authority was bleeding out in front of his own troops. He raised his blade one last time, roaring into the wind. "You are not saviors. You are corruptors. This fight is not finished." But his men no longer echoed him. Instead, they shifted uneasily, weapons lowering. One by one, they stepped back. Strake whirled on them in disbelief, only to see the Pack Lord's silhouette vanishing into the sanctuary, its call still echoing. Marshal Durbin exhaled slowly, turning to Holt. You didn't just save them. You broke him. Holt glanced down at his bloodied arm, then back at the path where the predators had vanished. His voice was quiet but carried weight enough to cut through the wind. I didn't break him. Truth did. The sun climbed higher, its light catching every scar of battle carved into the canyon walls. Strake stood alone at the head of his silent warriors, his blades shaking in his grip. On the Accord's feeds, his downfall was no longer a matter of opinion. It was fact written in sight and sound. Holt turned away at last, leading his men back toward camp. He felt the heat of the valley rising behind him, but his mind remained on what lay ahead. Strake had lost this moment, but a cornered warlord would strike again. And next time, it would not be hesitation he brought. It would be desperation. Stream it to the Accord, now, Marshal Durbin ordered, his voice edged with steel. His soldiers moved quickly, their dust-caked hands passing data cores toward Ven's console. The analyst hunched over the glowing uplink, his face pale under the shifting light of the heads-up display. Sparks hissed from strange circuits as he forced the signal through layers of jamming. On the ridge beyond, Strakevar still stood defiant, blade raised, but the silence of his own troops had become its own verdict. Holt Riven watched, arm throbbing under bandages, chest tight as the feed carried everything they had fought to protect. Cubs alive, the pack lord's call, predators refusing to be weapons. Ven exhaled with a shudder as the signal stabilized, his voice cracking from exhaustion. The Accord has it! Every second uncut. They're already reviewing. Holt laid a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor in the younger man's muscles. Hold on. We've carried them this far from behind their line. Envoy Narvik approached, his robes streaked with dust from the march. His gaze swept across the field, lingering on Strake's fractured formation. His voice was measured but heavy with consequence. The council is convening in orbit. They've witnessed your restraint. They've witnessed his fabrication. Judgment will come quickly. Durbin narrowed his eyes. Quickly for them is still too slow for us. He's not finished. As if to prove the point, Strake slammed his blade into the ground with a resounding crack. His voice roared across the canyon, raw with desperation. You think this shames me? I will drown you in proof of your corruption. His soldiers did not echo him. They remained still, weapons slack at their sides. Some looked away from their commander entirely, unwilling to meet his eye. Holt stepped forward, his throat raw but his words clear. Your lies are spent, Strake. They've seen your charges, your blasts, your attempt to bury cubs under stone. You've lost what cannot be rebuilt, the trust of your own. His voice carried not triumph, but finality, and even his soldiers felt its weight. The canyon grew quiet except for the rustle of dry wind. Then through Ven's display, a voice of authority spoke in clipped tones. Judgment rendered. Evidence confirms staged detonations. Accord declares Strakevar guilty of engineered provocation. Narvik lifted his chin, repeating the words aloud for all to hear. By decree of the Surveyor Accord, Strakevar is stripped of command. Effective immediately, shock rippled through the alien formation. Strake's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into fury. He raised his blade high, snarling. You do not strip me. I am war itself. He turned to his soldiers, expecting loyalty. Instead, hesitation locked their limbs. The pack lord's call still echoed in memory, drowning his command. Marshal Durbin leaned toward Holt, speaking low. He'll fight this with steel if he can't with lies. Holt nodded grimly. Then we let his own turn on him. The moment came swiftly. One of Strake's lieutenants, armor scarred and banners torn, stepped forward. His voice, guttural and resonant, carried to every ear. A warlord who dishonors a pack lord forfeits his right to lead. The statement cracked like thunder. Strake's face twisted, rage giving way to something closer to fear. His own guards moved in, hesitating only a second before wrenching the blade from his grip. The canyon floor trembled with the sound of it striking stone as they forced him to his knees. The silence that followed was heavy with finality. Then the Accord's voice returned through the feed. Command reassigned. Interim warden to be installed until council finalizes. Narvik turned to the humans, bowing his head slightly. You have your treaty. Sanctuary will be declared. Holt felt the weight lift from his chest, but it was not release. It was responsibility settling deeper. He looked at the valley where the predators had vanished, then back at the broken figure of Strake. He will not vanish quietly. His faction will scatter into the shadows. Dervin's reply was grim. Then we will keep watch in those shadows. Soldiers lowered their rifles at last, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Some sank onto stones, chests heaving. The battlefield stank of sweat, burnt dust, and fear not yet gone. Holt knelt beside the sled, where the cubs slept again under the thermal tarp. Their breathing was steady, their small bodies pressed together. He brushed a gloved finger across one rough ear, whispering so only they might hear. You carried more weight than any of us. Because of you, truth walked into daylight. The envoy stepped closer, his tone softer now. You've bound them not with chains, but with survival. That is why Strake failed. Remember that Holt stood, his gaze sweeping the men around him. Their eyes met his, not as soldiers to a scientist, but as brothers who had witnessed the same ordeal. Overhead, the sky glowed with streaks from the Accord's orbital relay, signals burning across the atmosphere as judgment was logged into history. Holt knew the fight was far from finished. Strake's body might be contained, but his fury had already seeded among others. Yet for this moment, truth had outlasted fabrication, and that was enough to steady tired hearts. Marshal Dervin drew in a long breath, voice rough but steady. We live another day because you refuse to answer lies with blood. Holt turned toward him, wary but resolute. We live another day because we refuse to let beasts be turned into weapons. That choice saved more than us. The camp settled into uneasy calm. Fires flickered, men wrapped in blankets of dust and fatigue. Holt remained awake, eyes fixed on the valley where the predators now roamed free. The memory of the pack lord's call lingered in his ears, deeper than sound, heavier than words. He knew its meaning. Guardianship had passed to him, whether he had sought it or not. Keep your eyes sharp. He'll try to claw his way back even now, Marshal Dervin warned, his voice low but carrying across the battered camp. Soldiers turned toward the far ridge where Strakefar knelt under the grip of his own guards. His armor was cracked, his banner torn from his shoulders, yet he thrashed like a cornered beast, roaring curses into the dust. Holt Riven stood still, arm bandaged, face streaked with dirt, watching with steady eyes. He could smell the smoke of extinguished fires drifting from shattered walkers, hear the groans of wounded men being carried from the field, and feel the stifling weight of judgment pressing down upon the canyon. This was the last convulsion of a warlord who had built his strength on spectacle and seen it dismantled before his soldiers' eyes. Strake's voice tore through the stillness, raw with desperation. You think this trial binds me? I am not chained by your counsel, I am fire itself. He lurched against the guards restraining him, spittle flying as he screamed. His own men flinched at his fury, some staring at the ground, others fixing their gaze on the valley where the predators had gone. Holt stepped closer, his boots scraping the stone. You were never fire, Strake. You were smoke, choking your people until they could not see the truth. Now they see it clearly. His words echoed off the canyon walls, and for a moment even the guards' hands tightened, as though reminded why they held him down. Envoy Narvik emerged from the line of humans, his robe darkened with dust, his voice calm but unyielding. By decree of the Accord, Strakefar is sentenced to removal. He will not return to command, nor will his name carry the weight of authority. His crimes have been documented, his betrayals preserved for judgment across worlds. The envoy's words did not carry theatrical flourish. They were steady as stone, each syllable stripping away the last shreds of the warlord's power. Strake's final attempt at defiance came as a rasped whisper. You cannot erase me. My anger will outlive your treaties. Holt crouched near him, close enough to see the fury trembling in the alien's jaw. His reply was steady, almost quiet. Anger burns fast and dies alone. What outlives this day is not your rage. It is the sight of your cubs alive, sleeping on a human's chest, and the pack lord turning from your command. That memory is the weapon that ended you. Strake's eyes widened at the mention, as if the very image stabbed deeper than chains. He let out a strangled growl and finally sagged, his breath ragged, fight gone. The canyon slowly exhaled with him. Soldiers lowered their rifles, shifting their weight as if the earth itself had grown lighter. Holt rose and turned toward the men. Some looked broken with exhaustion, others carried blood-stained bandages, but all of them met his gaze with recognition. They had survived without succumbing to slaughter, and that truth mattered more than any banner. Dervin stepped beside Holt, his weathered face hardened by years of command, yet now touched with a trace of respect. You forced a warlord to his knees without spilling what he wanted most, innocent blood. That is rarer than any victory I've known, Holt answered with a weary voice. It wasn't me alone. It was every hand that chose restraint when it would have been easier to fire. That choice is what gave us proof stronger than his lies. Beyond the human lines, the predators had vanished into the valley, their growls fading into distance. Yet their presence lingered like guardians, etched into memory. Holt thought of the cubs, the feel of their frail bodies pressed against his chest, their tiny hearts beating against his armor. That moment, caught in broadcast, had reached beyond this canyon. It had entered homes, war councils, and hearts across distant systems. It would be replayed again and again, a human shielding the future of another species not for gain, but because letting them die would have meant surrendering truth. Ven approached, face pale but eyes bright despite fatigue. He held up his console, still glowing weakly. Accord confirmed. Treaty drafted. Sanctuary Valley recognized as protected ground. Shared corridors established under joint watch. Holt studied the display, then looked back at the men around him. Their future would not be measured by a signature alone. It would be measured by whether predators roamed free and whether lies could ever again outweigh proof. Envoy Narvik stepped closer, addressing Holt directly. What you did here will ripple outward. Other councils will reconsider how they judge humans. Some will fear you more. Others will trust you more. But none will ignore you. Holt absorbed the words, feeling their weight press into him like another scar. Then let them watch carefully. We've shown them enough to decide whether they want partners or enemies. The guards dragged Strake away, his voice reduced to mutters, fury drained. His soldiers did not follow him. They turned instead toward the Pack Lord's trail, their eyes lowered in silent acknowledgement of where loyalty now belonged. The sound of his curses faded into nothing. Night descended slowly, bringing cool air that washed away the stench of burnt stone. Fires flickered in the camp, men tending wounds, sharing quiet rations, some falling into exhausted sleep. Holt walked to the edge of the valley, the stars emerging overhead like scattered embers. He listened to the faint echoes of predators moving through the sanctuary, their heavy steps rumbling like distant thunder. He felt the memory of their cubs pressed to him, the heat of life clinging in desperate trust. That image had changed more than a battle. It had altered how two species saw one another. Marshal Dervin joined him, his boots crunching against gravel. He stared into the valley, his voice low. When I first saw you step into that rubble after the collapse, I thought you were condemning us all. Now I see you carried more than 2 cubs out of that hole. You carried proof that we fight differently. Holt turned to him, his reply simple but firm. We fight to protect what cannot speak for itself. That is why we endure. The words hung in the cooling air, stronger than any banner. Dervin clapped his shoulder once before retreating to the fires, leaving Holt alone with the silence. He stood there until dawn edged the sky with pale light, until the first calls of the gnarls drifted back across the ridge. They were alive, unbound, and their future longer in Strake's grasp. Long after the last embers faded, history would remember the title that emerged from this canyon. The predator's cubs had gone missing, buried under stone by their own warlord's deceit. They had been found alive, pressed against a human's chest, carried back to their kind with proof the world could not deny. That image became the emblem of Sanctuary, the sign stitched into uniforms, the mark displayed on Accord councils. It told every watcher that humanity was not defined by conquest or theft, but by choosing guardianship in the face of manipulation. And so the story closed not with the roar of guns, but with the steady rhythm of breath, the cubs breathing against armor, the Pack Lord answering their call, and the men who bore witness understanding what it meant to carry truth into battle. For all its dust, scars, and blood, this was the day a warlord's lies were broken by something stronger. This was the day humanity proved it could be trusted with the future of another species. If this story of survival and truth struck you, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY sagas. Now we want to hear from you. If humanity ever had to prove itself in front of the galaxy, what moment of ours should be remembered as the ultimate proof? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where battles are won not only with strength, but with choices that echo across worlds. See you in the next story.